Chapter 1305, House of Parting. This is the House of Parting. It is the furthest point of Weave as one travels upstream. Anank's voice sounded uncharacteristically dispirited. House of Parting. Sunny studied the artificial island and the solemn structure built upon it, then turned to the old woman and asked, "It's a windmill." She nodded. "Yes, my lord. The tower harvests the wind to maintain the island." Anank lingered for a second and then added, "The cities of the Great River are actually more akin to flotillas, each consisting of many city ships, some small like this one, some spanning dozens of kilometers across. They migrate sometimes, but mostly they have to stay in place. There is nothing to anchor a ship to on the Great River, though." Nephi's raised an eyebrow. "Is the Great River so deep that no anchor can reach its bottom?" Anank shook her head. "It is not that the floor of the Great River is too deep, it's that it doesn't exist. No one has ever managed to reach it, at least. So, we had to find other ways." She pointed to the rotating blades of the towering windmill. "There are various ways to make a city ship resist the current, from mundane ones to magical. The House of Parting, you can't see it from here, but there is a great water wheel at the back of the island, constantly propelling it forward at the same speed as the river pushes it back. Its mechanism is mostly powered by the current itself, but the windmill lightens the burden significantly." She sighed. "The island's mechanism is on the brink of collapse now. I've tried to repair it as well as I could, but my knowledge is insufficient to keep an entire city from breaking apart. There's little point to, anyway." Sunny and Nephi's looked at the dark windmill, feeling a sense of awe. The island in front of them was actually the creation of incredible human ingenuity, a floating city district that used the wind and the power of the great river itself to fight against the currents of time. Even now that the people of Weave were gone, it was still pushing forward, refusing to become a thing of the past. The ketch approached the island in solemn silence. As it drew close, Anank released the wind filling the sails, skillfully guided the boat to the pier, and moored it to the pier with a piece of rope. The three of them left the small ketch for the first time in a long, long while. Feeling the sturdy wooden planks of the pier under his feet, Sunny enjoyed the fact that the ground was not swaying and took a few steps. He was swaying like a drunk himself for the first couple, but then regained his balance. As he stretched his limbs, Nephi's looked around and asked, "The House of Parting, why was this place given such a name?" Anank smiled faintly as she headed toward the stone hall and gestured for them to follow. "It is the point of Weave that is the furthest upstream. You know that the bodies of riverborn like me don't age, however. Humans are not created to be immortal. If one lives for too long and her soul grows weary, she might want to rest in the embrace of shadow." The old woman turned around and looked at her ketch, tied to the pier of the House of Parting. "When that happens, the one leaving comes to the House of Parting. Those who love them come too to say farewell. They prepare a feast and celebrate. When all is said and done, the weary riverborn set sail to go on their last journey. They sail far, far upstream until they reach the end of their lifespan and pass away, one way or another." Anank lingered for a while and then added wistfully, "Actually, I considered going on such a journey too before receiving a dream of your arrival. Ironically, I ended up repeating all the same steps, stopping just shy of the last one. It feels strange to return to the House of Parting from upstream alive." She chuckled and shook her head. "In truth, there are two of these houses. The other one is situated at the furthest point of Weave downstream. All other human cities on the Great River are the same, I'd imagine. The lower house is meant for those who were not given a choice and died an untimely death. Their bodies, if recovered, are sent downstream to return to the estuary, the origin of everything. Of course, every outsider departs on their last journey from the lower house, as well." Sonny tilted his head, thinking, if the bodies of all perished outsiders were sent downstream, and the estuary was the source of the defilement, was that how dusk of fallen grace had ended up becoming a nightmare creature? Or had she succumbed to corruption first, and was given the river burial as a result? She had been wearing a burial shroud when they first met, after all. Is she a friend or an enemy? Anning sighed. My lord and lady, we will spend the night here. I will retrieve some of the supplies I stored on this island, and in the morning we will continue on the way to Weave proper. There will be more supplies for you to take downstream there, so I hope you don't mind. Sonny felt that spending the night in a place called the House of Parting was a bit ominous, but he was not going to refuse a night of sleeping on solid ground, with a roof over his head, out of superstition. More than that, while he and Nephi's had enjoyed plenty of rest on the way, Anink had mostly stayed awake, controlling the catch and preventing anything dangerous from happening to them. She had to take a break, too. He nodded. Of course, guide the way. The old woman nodded and continued walking toward the great hall. Her steps were light and energetic. By the time the 7 sons fell into the river, the 3 of them were inside the House of Parting. The interior of the grand hall was beautiful and solemn, but at the same time strangely modest. The followers of Weaver had not been a prosperous nation, after all. Looking at the decor of the stone hall, Sonny could clearly see which ornaments and decorations had been inherited from the original outsiders, who came from the dream realm, and which were crafted by their river-born descendants. Despite being attentive and earnest artisans, the Riverborn were clearly much less sophisticated than their ancestors, not to mention extremely limited in terms of resources. In fact, he was surprised by some of the things he had seen already. The wood that Anink's ketch and the pier of the House of Parting were built of, for example. Where had it come from? The fruits that she had treated them to as well. There was no soil anywhere on the great river, so how could there be trees? How could there be flour to bake pies and tea leaves to brew tea? Curious, he asked the old woman about it. She smiled. The trees, there are some. There are floating gardens and fields in Weave. They are not too large, of course, because the surface of the city is limited. So, we can only afford to eat fruit, bread, and rice on special occasions. Most of the year, the river people eat what the river gives. Sonny looked down, suddenly feeling guilty. So the delicious food he and Nephi's had been enjoying was something that Anink herself had not tasted often. They were currently in one of the smaller chambers of the House of Parting, the old woman preparing to cook them a late supper. He had been rather complacent in allowing her to take care of them, mostly because it felt great to be pampered by someone caring and kind, but also because Anink was strangely adamant about treating Sonny and Nephi's with utmost dedication. However, he suddenly wanted something else to happen today. Walking over to the old woman, he gently pushed her away from the table where all the ingredients were waiting to be prepared and cooked. Go rest, Anink. I'll take care of everything. She looked at him with big eyes. But my lord. Sonny resolutely shook his head. No buts. You don't need to cook. Today this lord is going to cook for you instead. Throwing an evaluating look at the ingredients, he grinned and added, Do you know, I am planning to get rich by opening a restaurant in the future. Then he paused for a moment, scratched his head and pointed at Nephi's, who gave him a confused look in response. Sonny smiled brightly. And that is my star chef. Come and help your boss, chef. You don't want to get fired before the restaurant even opens, do you? Sonny could not really treat Anink to the staples of the waking world cuisine since he lacked the ingredients. He couldn't even cook up the few classic military dishes, which were mostly based on using synthetic rations in inventive ways. However, he and Nephi still managed to make a delicious meal. They were awakened, after all, and awakened were supreme masters of turning monster meat into all kinds of delightful dishes. In fact, awakened cuisine was as varied, as its basic ingredients were limited. There were some fundamental skills taught to everyone, but each citadel and region of the dream realm added its own flavor to the tradition. So, each awakened cook was, in a sense, unique. Take Sonny, for example. His fundamental skills had been taught to him by teacher Julius. Since teacher Julius was anchored in Bastion, Sonny's cooking acquired a hint of Bastion's tradition. Later, it was influenced by the flavor passed down to Nephi's by the Immortal Flame clan, and then assimilated the improvised habits of the sleepers of the Dark City. After that, he absorbed the local tradition of the Chained Isles, as well as learning this and that from the government awakened in Antarctica. Since there was no other awakened whose culinary skills were the result of this exact combination of influences, the flavor of Sonny's cooking was unique. Soon, the chamber was filled with a delicious smell. The meal they prepared was not the most visually stunning, but its fragrance was tantalizing. The meat had just the right amount of crust on the outside, while the insides were juicy and moist. It had absorbed the spices and the heat of the coals, becoming tender enough to melt on the tongue. Still, it didn't look too pretty. Awakened did not really care about the presentation, since their meals were usually eaten in a hurry while keeping one eye out for the prowling abominations. There were some side dishes, at least. Anank tasted the dish presented to her with diligently hidden caution, but then her eyes widened slightly. Throwing a quick glance at Sonny and Nephi's, she hesitated for a few moments, and then attacked her food like a hungry wolf. Sonny smiled. "That's better." It was a far cry from the start of their journey together, when he had to force her to eat even a single small pie. The old woman's appetite was not making him worry anymore. That said, why was she so surprised? Do I not look like a guy who can outcook every damned cook out there? Sonny grimaced. Well, maybe it was because he was going around boasting about how he had eaten nothing but rotten mimic meat for a month. It was only fair for people to doubt his taste after hearing such things. Still, I better get Aiko to do the promotions when I open my restaurant, and maybe write me a guide on what I should and shouldn't say. He could have the shop and the restaurant in the same building. Customers would come to browse the memories, then have a meal to celebrate the purchase, and he would receive the money for both. Chuckling, Sonny focused on his own portion. Soon, they were done with the supper and were preparing to rest. The house of parting consisted of the main ceremonial hall, several smaller halls, and a scattering of rooms for the departing and their close ones to sleep in before saying the final goodbyes. So, Sonny and Nephi's were going to enjoy sleeping on actual beds tonight, for the first time since leaving the siege capital to participate in the Battle of the Black Skull. Before that, however, all three of them remained around the table, drinking tea and savoring its refreshing warmth. Despite the solemn nature of their surroundings, the atmosphere was light and uplifting. It was hard not to enjoy the simple comforts after spending months in the wilderness. Maybe it was this relaxed mood that prompted Sonny to ask the question he had been hesitating to ask for a while. Putting down his cup, he glanced at the old woman and asked, "Anink, can I ask what rank you are?" She looked at him curiously. "My rank? Why, of course. I have reached transcendence not too long ago, my lord." Sonny nodded slowly. He had initially suspected that Anank was a being of much greater power, but after getting to know her and learning about the fate of Weave, his impression changed. It felt a bit strange to meet an awakened who was 200 years old, but only as powerful as someone like Saint Tyrus. The immortal chain lords notwithstanding. The spell had descended into the waking world only half a century ago, after all, but there were already saints and sovereigns. However, it made sense. The original inhabitants of the great realm had not been cursed with as cruel a teacher as the nightmare spell. They had not benefited from its merciless guidance and the lethal necessity to either ascend or die. Even Anank, who was a priestess of the spell and bestowed with some of its powers, did not know anything about nightmares. Without the nightmares, how had the ancient humans even awakened? That was something Sonny had been curious about for a long time. In fact, he knew very little about how the ancient awakened did anything without the spell. He leaned forward a little and asked, his voice full of curiosity, "How does one become transcendent?" Anak looked at him in surprise. "You don't know, my lord." Sonny shook his head. "I do know, of course, how one might transcend in the future, where the nightmare spell controls all these matters. But I don't know how people rose to greater power before." Nephis pricked her ears as well. The old woman smiled, lingered for a while, and then said thoughtfully, "Although my knowledge is limited, I will try to explain as best I can. Let's see. The first step is, of course, to awaken. To awaken, one must gain control over their soul essence and use that control to form the soul core." Sonny blinked. "In that order?" Anak did not seem to understand the question. "Naturally. How would one form the core without being able to control essence? It is like trying to build a building without bricks. There are some powerful creatures who are born with their soul cores already formed, sure, and have to learn to move their essence as they mature. But most are born dormant, like us humans." She paused for a moment. "Learning how to control essence is the hardest part. Forming the core takes time and effort, but as long as you have the knowledge, success is all but guaranteed. Well, some still fail, of course, and die after their souls collapse." Sonny and Nephis glanced at each other. So, the ancient humans awakened in the reverse order compared to modern humans, who formed their soul core after the first nightmare, and gained the ability to control essence after surviving the first journey to the dream realm. That was how the spell arranged things. "Interesting." Nephis took a sip of her tea and asked, her voice tinged with a hint of curiosity, "Then how does one learn to control their essence?" The awakened of the waking world received the ability to sense their essence from the spell. The intuitive knowledge of how to control it was gifted to them. Too, it just took time and practice to turn that control into a practical skill. Most received these gifts after awakening, while Nephis had to catch up after becoming a master. Anak thought for a few moments. "There is no single way to gain control over your soul essence. In fact, it is a unique experience for many. Some spend long years meditating and perfecting their souls, eventually entering a state of unity between mind and soul. Some attune themselves to the world and gather insights about the nature of living things, traveling from realm to realm. Some follow the teachings of great warriors and train their bodies, testing themselves through hardship and battle. Some even receive sudden epiphanies in a moment of dire crisis with no preparation whatsoever." She hesitated for a bit. "However, there is a path that anyone can walk, both the simplest and the most dangerous, as well as the most vile." Sonny raised an eyebrow. "And what is that path?" Anak sighed. "It is to absorb soul essence that has already awakened, through killing those who have already awakened and plundering their soul shards." Her face turned grim. "The awakened essence already knows how to be controlled, so when it is mixed with the essence of dormant beings, it will change that essence a little. Absorb enough of it and your essence will awaken too. Things were simple during the Age of Heroes, when many corrupted prowled the realms, and humans had to battle them to survive. But as the eras changed, and there were fewer monsters to kill, some humans and noble creatures turned to killing each other instead." The old woman fell silent. Sonny and Nephis were somber too. It was too easy to imagine what vile acts those who lusted for power could commit in a world that rewarded murder with strength. In fact, the same vileness could have consumed the waking world, where absorbing the essence of slain humans was easier than hunting down countless nightmare creatures. If not for the government and people like Jet, who maintained order and suppressed the darker side of the awakened society with an iron fist, things would have turned grim long ago. Legacy clans also played their part, preventing human enclaves in the dream realm from spiraling into lawlessness. Eventually, Sunny sighed and shook his head. So, once your soul essence awakens and you can control it, the next step is to patiently work on forming the soul core. What happens then? Anank smiled and pointed to her chest, where the soul core of a human was usually located. Accumulation of power. Ascension is a step of rising above one's mortal nature by improving the quality of their essence, and their body as well. This step can be slow if one refines themselves naturally, or fast if one improves their essence by absorbing the essence of stronger beings. Once the soul essence reaches a qualitative change, the soul core will reform itself and grow stronger as well. Of course, it won't happen without some conscious refinement either. Sunny tilted his head. How does one refine their essence exactly? Anank laughed. It's not something I can explain in one conversation. There are methods and techniques, the knowledge of which has been accumulated over countless generations and is taught to disciples over many years. Even then, very few manage to succeed. Of course, all those who do succeed have to find the way into their soul sea first. Without the ability to enter the soul sea, it would take one many lifetimes to ascend even with the best refinement technique. She shook her head with a smile. At least that is how it is for us humans. Some of the noble creatures have their own ways. They can possess multiple soul cores as well and walk the path of ascension more naturally. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Wait, people have to learn how to enter their soul seas. The old woman nodded matter-of-factly. Of course, that is, without the guidance of the nightmare spell. Weaver gave us mortals a gift that can hasten each step on the path of ascension, including the discovery of one's soul sea. That's unexpected. Everyone just assumed that being able to access the soul sea was a natural ability of all awakened, including sleepers. As it turned out, that was another thing that the spell had simplified for the humans of the waking world. Ruthless, relentless, and immensely effective, that is how the spell is. The more Sunny learned about the nightmare spell, the more he realized how ingenious and cruelly effective it was in forcing people to become stronger, stronger, and stronger still, until they either rose as high as they could and higher than that, or died. For what purpose, he did not know. Nephi sighed. What about transcendence? Anank nodded. Transcendence is different. It is not just about accumulation. It is a step of profound transformation, where a mortal assumes the first qualities of the divine. The soul essence has to become much more potent. The soul core has to become much more voluminous. Most importantly, an awakened has to become one with the world and be recognized by it. Their soul has to be expanded beyond the confines of the body and fused, to a small extent, with the world. It is hard to explain with words, forgive me. Sunny tilted his head, thinking. Anank's words did indeed sound very vague and esoteric, but he felt that he understood what she was talking about. It was like when Saint Tyrus appeared and the sunlight seemed to shift a little, as if wishing to be close to her. The world itself responded to the transcendent, and even bent to their will sometimes. Then again, it also responded to a few people below the transcendent rank, like Nephi's or Jet or Sunny himself. That was peculiar. Anank took a sip of tea and added, her voice bright. Of course, the connection between a transcendent and the world is not all-encompassing. Rather, it is a connection to one or, very rarely, several aspects of the world, be it water, wind, shadow, light, or something else entirely. And therefore, the most important step an ascended human has to take to achieve transcendence is to awaken their aspect. Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other in confusion. Awaken their aspect, what do you mean? The old woman coughed. But that is exactly what I mean, that one must possess an aspect to transcend. Sonny massaged his temples. Wait, don't all awakened possess an aspect? Anning chuckled. Of course not. Every awakened human possesses the potential to realize an aspect, but there are plenty of those who never do, maybe even most. However, the higher you rise on the path of ascension, the harder it becomes to move further without claiming your aspect as well as your flaw. It is impossible to transcend without them. That information was truly shocking. Neither Sonny nor Nephi's could digest it quickly. Awakened without aspects, there was such a thing. Sonny tried to remember every human he had fought in the first and second nightmares. Had all of them shown aspect abilities? He really couldn't remember, or rather, he could not tell based on his memories. Nephi's meanwhile frowned and asked, her voice full of contemplation. Why is it that only humans possess aspects? Why don't creatures, noble creatures, have them as well? To the humans of the waking world, everything that was not a human was a nightmare creature. But of course, Sonny had learned a long time ago that this wasn't the case. There were humans, and there were creatures like the original saint or nightmare. It was only after they succumbed to corruption did the noble creatures, as Anik called such beings, become abominations. The problem was that there were only humans in the waking world, while every creature in the dream realm was already corrupted. That was why the concept of something that was not human, but also not abominable, was hard to accept. However, in the ancient times, humans and noble creatures lived side by side. Nevertheless, the difference between them was the same. Humans could only rise in rank but possessed aspects, while noble creatures rose both in rank and class but had no aspects of their own. So the question Nephi's asked was indeed interesting. Anik smiled. Why, it is because noble creatures were created by the gods, while we humans weren't. Sonny blinked. Huh. He did know that creating living things was an authority exclusive to the gods, which was why Nether's feat of making saint and her people was so remarkable. Now, he learned that all creatures were the result of the gods exercising that authority. But what did Anik mean when she said that humans weren't made the same way? Noticing their confusion, she chuckled. Humans weren't created by anyone, and instead just appeared from the same stuff the gods were born from. It's just that, if the gods were the flame, then we humans were tiny sparks that shot out as the bonfire was dying out. Nevertheless, we come from the same source, which is why all humans possess the potential to become divine, as well as the ability to awaken an aspect. Why the path of ascension is open to us. Sonny frowned. There was an ever-changing void where desire was born. From it came direction and the gods. He still did not really understand the meaning of these mysterious words, but if Anik was telling the truth, and not just retelling baseless myths, humans came from the desire and direction as well, just as the gods had. He shook his head. All right, I can understand that. But why did you say that it's not only an aspect that is required to transcend, but also the flaw? The old woman sighed. Because one can't exist without the other. Imperfection is also an absolute law, just like death, and so nothing is flawless. Even the world itself is flawed. Even the gods who were born flawless are not perfect anymore. And so we humans are flawed too. She smiled and added, her voice calm. But that is a good thing. Flawless things are perfect, and so they can never improve. They can never grow. They can only remain still and unchanging, which is no different from being dead. Being flawed is the essence of life, my lord and lady. It is also the essence of growth. After all, what is life if not a constant struggle to grow and improve? Sonny almost choked on his tea. He had grown accustomed to Anik being helpful and accommodating, so he did not expect her to become philosophical all of a sudden. Worse still, because of his own flaw, He had no chance but to answer her philosophical question. What is life, huh? He coughed. Well, I don't know. To me, life is all about being rich and comfortable. Throw a little decadence in the mix and it's even better. If I ever manage to build such a delightful life for myself, I'll be more than happy to never improve or grow, apart from growing fatter, that is. The old woman laughed. That is a remarkable dream, my lord. Nephi's threw a burning gaze at him at the mention of decadence, then turned to Anak. Then what about the next step? How does one become supreme? Her voice was tense. The old woman lingered for a while, then shook her head with a sigh. That I don't know, and there is no one left to teach me. I am sorry that I can't be of help. Sonny shook his head. No, you've already been very helpful. We learned a lot from you. Anak smiled. In that case, thank you for this meal, my lord and lady. I've been blessed by your grace. Rest well tonight. She rose and added, her voice tinged with melancholy. Tomorrow, we sail to the center of the city. After she left, Sonny and Nephi's remained silent for a while. Both were thoughtful, pondering the startling truths of how the ancient humans walked the path of ascension before the nightmare spell. Eventually, Sonny sighed. It seems that awakening took a lot longer before, but was not nearly as fatal as it is with the nightmare spell. Nephi's nodded silently. He scratched the back of his head and added, I'm more curious about something else, though. If it is possible to awaken without the help of the spell, then why has no one accomplished just that in the waking world? Why were there no awakened in our history? She frowned. Maybe it is because the waking world has nothing to do with the dream realm and functioned according to a different set of laws. Or maybe there were awakened in our history, but their stories have become mere myths. Nephi shook her head and added, her voice uncertain. It would also not be surprising if the possibility was there, but no one has ever managed to grasp it. After all steps except the first one, gaining the ability to sense your essence, require some kind of knowledge. Forming the core, refining essence, expanding the soul, you wouldn't be able to do it blindly. For the ancient humans of the dream realm, it was not too hard to gain that knowledge. All they had to do was observe the awakened creatures or learn directly from one of the deities. Sonny nodded. But those deities are all long dead. There were only humans in the waking world, and so they had no one to learn from and no one to show them that there was something to be learned. Yes, it is a good theory. The theory that our world is simply different from the dream realm is also good, as well as that there were actually a few awakened in history. They're all good theories. Which one do you think is the correct one? Nephi's lingered before answering. After a while, she sighed. There's no way to tell. We still know too little about the dream realm. We also don't know how the nightmare spell infected our world and why. But personally, I don't buy that there has always been a connection between the two. If so, then why is the waking world so isolated, so unique, so singular? She shook her head. Why are there no similarities in the languages, the myths, the traditions? Why has there never been an awakened creature on Earth before the nightmare spell? No soul shards, no sorcery, no aspects and no flaws. Why was there no corruption? Sonny remained silent for a while, thinking. Then he said tentatively, maybe it was created as a sanctuary or an ark. If so, then perhaps it is precisely because there were no awakened, no soul shards, no sorcery and no aspects, that there was no corruption. He shrugged with a sigh. As for the languages and myths, I don't know. To be honest, I don't really believe in that sanctuary stuff. I just said what came to mind. You are right. Our world is the only place that was drastically different from the dream realm before the nightmare spell infected it. We don't know anything about anything, so how would we know the reason why? Sonny shook his head and rose to wash the dishes. In any case, I am tired and it is time to rest. Where are you going to sleep? Nephi's gave him a long look. Is there a particular reason you're asking? Hearing that, he almost dropped the dirty plates. What? I just want to know which room you chose, to pick a different one. He huffed, glanced at her, and grinned. Although, but Nephi's was already standing up. Good night. A few moments later, she was gone. Sonny remained standing for a while, alone in the empty chamber. Eventually, he sighed. How come I'm the only one doing dishes? Look. The ketch was flying across the water, its sails full of wind. Sonny was standing at the bow, staring into the distance curiously. Nephi's was a few steps back, sitting on the deck with her eyes closed. Hearing his voice, she opened them and looked ahead. There, a floating city was slowly appearing from beyond the horizon. Weave. It was much larger than Sonny had imagined, with countless artificial islands connected together to form a single whole. There was a network of canals between the various districts that served as roads, and a forest of narrow towers rising into the sky. Most of them were wind catchers, just like the tower of the House of Parting was. Some blades still rotated, some were broken and still. Torn scarlet fabric fluttered in the wind. The architecture of Weave was varied, airy, and beautiful. Some buildings were constructed out of stone, some seemed to be carved of ivory, some were pavilions of sun-bleached, bright silk. There were districts with homes and houses, groves of fruit trees, and even entire cityships taken entirely by a single elegant palace or a solemn temple. Some distance away from the residential districts, separated from them by a wide stretch of water, were vast floating fields and gardens. Bathed in the light of the seven suns, the floating city was strange and fantastical. However, neither Sonny nor Nephi's were enchanted by its dreamlike beauty, because, above all else, Weave seemed eerie and forlorn. The tall wind catchers were still or broken. The streets and canals were empty, with no soul in sight. The groves were overgrown and wild, while the fields were desolate and empty. Some city ships were drifting apart, their mechanisms broken, while others were tilted and partially submerged in water. It was a ghost town. Strangely, though, while some buildings bore scars or had collapsed, most were intact. This was not the picture of destruction and devastation that they had imagined. Welcome to Weave, my lord and lady. Anank's voice sounded slightly mournful. It also sounded very different from before. There had been a time when her voice was weak and creaky, like dry wood. Now it was bright and melodious like a clear stream. Right. Sonny still felt rather strange when talking to the current Anank. The old priestess. No, he couldn't even call her that anymore because Anank wasn't old anymore. Turning around, he looked at the young woman steering the ketch. She seemed only a few years older than Sonny and Nephi's, if any. More than that, she was exquisitely beautiful. With her small stature and glistening ebony hair, dusky skin, and piercing blue eyes, Anank looked like an enchanting river spirit. Her lovely face was lively and captivating, and her disarming smile was bright enough to illuminate the world. It's weird. Sonny was deeply uncomfortable for the last couple of days because of how young Anank had become. On top of that, despite being 10 times his age, she seemed too earnest and even slightly naive. That was the person he had been calling grandmother. With a sigh, Sonny tried to shake off the feeling of incongruity and asked in a strange tone, "Haven't you told us that Weave was destroyed, Anank? It doesn't seem damaged that terribly." The young priestess remained silent for a while, then answered with a sad smile. "There is more than one way to destroy a city, my lord." With that, she moved the steering oar and sent the ketch flying toward the central district of the eerie city of Weave, where only the wind disrupted the ghostly silence and emptiness permeated desolate streets. Soon, they slowed down and entered one of the canals. Anank whispered a few words, and the sails lowered themselves. Summoning her long harpoon, she stood up and used it as a pole to push the ketch forward. As it traveled deeper into the heart of the city, Sunny and Nephi silently watched the districts that floated past. Indeed, there were no living beings here, at least none that they could see. Nephi shifted slightly. You said that Weave was devastated by a defiled. Is that creature still here? Anik slowly shook her head. No, but I've been absent for a long time. An abomination or two could have crawled out of the river to make a nest among the ruins. It is better to be careful. Sunny and Nephi glanced at each other and silently summoned their weapons. Just what the hell has happened here? Eventually, the ketch reached an intersection of two wide canals. Anik allowed it to drift for a dozen meters, then stopped at a small platform. There were stone steps leading from the platform to one of the central districts of the city, and after roping the ketch to a post, she lightly jumped down. Together, the three of them ascended the stairs and entered a wide plaza. It was desolate and partially submerged in water, with scars on the collapsed buildings hinting at a fearsome battle that must have taken place here a long time ago. Anik, who had been strangely reluctant to answer their questions before, finally sighed and turned to face them. The defiled that destroyed Weave visited us almost half a century ago. However, the city did not die until a few decades after that. Both Sunny and Nephi looked at her in confusion. How could a city be destroyed decades after it was attacked? The young priestess remained silent for a while, then gestured to the drowned plaza. This is where the battle ended and the slaughter started. I've told you before that outsiders are vital to the existence of the river people. They are the oldest and most powerful among us. They are also the only ones who can travel unimpeded across the river. Without them, the cities would become completely isolated from each other. Well, that doesn't really apply to this city of exiles, since we were always on our own. She looked down. But since Weave is located close to the desolate future, we had to constantly defend ourselves from powerful corrupted. The elders were the only ones who could pursue and eradicate them. Otherwise, those horrid creatures could come and go as they pleased, retreating when wounded to attack again and again and again. So that was how the defiled destroyed our city. Anik gazed at the drowned plaza with a grim expression. He simply killed every outsider in Weave. After the elders were gone, the rest of us were slowly driven to extinction. Some died fighting the corrupted, some succumbed to sorrow and despair. The less of us there were, the harder it was to keep those who remained alive. Blow after blow, disaster after disaster. Eventually, despite all my efforts, Weave was no more. The young priestess took a deep breath and turned to them with a sad smile. The ships and the buildings remain, but without the people, they are just an empty shell. She took a deep breath. My lord, my lady, I told you that we must come here to gather supplies, but that was not entirely true. To be honest, I just wanted you to see Weave at least once, so that someone would remember it, remember us, even when the ships and the buildings are gone too. Sunny felt his chest becoming heavy, but Nephi seemed to be affected more. Her face was motionless as usual, but there was a hint of darkness in her eyes. Taking a step forward, she placed her hand on Anik's shoulder and gently squeezed it. She must have seen herself in the young priestess. The priestess of the nightmare spell, in a city built by the followers of Weaver, that title must have carried incredible weight. It was very likely that Anik had suddenly become the ruler of the decimated Weave after all the elders were slaughtered by the defiled. Only to see it wither and die, no matter how hard she fought to save it. Just like Nephi had watched the village she built be swallowed by the darkness in the second nightmare, until she was the only one left alive, just like Nephi had been the only one to survive. Anik patted Neph's hand and smiled. It is all right, my lady. It happened a long time ago anyway. The corner of Sunny's mouth twitched. Looking away, he asked in a perfectly even tone. That defiled, he must have been strong. If the outsiders were the most powerful among you, then not just any creature could have killed them all. Still, just in case I get a chance to meet him one day, is there a way I can recognize him? I'm going to kill that bastard. The young woman lingered for a while, then sighed. Yes, my lord. It was not just any defiled, indeed. The one who came to weave is infamous enough that even we had heard of him. It was the Mad Prince. He frowned. The Mad Prince. Anik nodded. He is called Mad Prince, or the Prince of Madness. That fiend is one of the 6 plagues. She shivered and looked away, as if suddenly uneasy. The 6 plagues are not the most powerful of the defiled, and neither are they the most ancient. However, they are the most feared and loathsome. Mad Prince, Soul Stealer, Undying Slaughter, Torment, Devouring Beast, and the most harrowing of them all, the Dread Lord. Everyone on the great river has heard their names. They are also called the Heralds of the Estuary sometimes. The young priestess frowned. Some even say that the Dread Lord is the true ruler of Verge, and that all defiled submit to his commands. If so, maybe he was the one who sent the Mad Prince to weave. I doubt it, though. I am not sure if that thing can be controlled by anyone, so he must have come of his own accord. Nephis, who had been listening silently for a while, suddenly asked in a steady tone. The Dread Lord is said to be the ruler of defilement. What about the first seeker? What power do he and the other 5 plagues possess? What rank and class are they? Anik smiled helplessly. I am sorry, my lady. Weave is far away from the other human cities, so whatever news used to reach us was vague and fragmentary. The first seeker. No one had seen him in a long, long time. Some say that he has turned into a mindless mass of rotting flesh because of the defilement. Some say that he was severely wounded by the Serpent King and is yet to recover. Some say that the Dread Lord has subjugated and imprisoned him. She lingered. As for the 6 plagues, we knew very little of them. The Soul Stealer is said to possess the ability to wear the skin of those he kills. The Devouring Beast is immensely ferocious and feeds on human flesh. Torment is known for subjecting her victims to harrowing torture. Undying Slaughter is eternally consumed by insatiable bloodlust. The Dread Lord, no one has ever survived facing him, so his powers are unknown. The young priestess smiled bitterly. I can tell you about the Mad Prince, though. He is a raving lunatic who seems to be as murderous as he is tormented by his own madness. He looks human, or at least human-shaped. His clothes are tattered, and his face is a mass of scars, which look to have been inflicted by his own nails. He is said to wear a tarnished crown, but I haven't seen it myself. At first glance, he appears rather pitiful, however. Beneath that ragged surface hides a vile and hateful monster. She gritted her teeth and looked at the scarred buildings surrounding the plaza. His powers are that of a sword saint, but his swordsmanship is as mad as he is himself. It is violent and utterly chaotic, yet cruel and savagely lethal. He finds joy in tormenting his victims, then grows indifferent to their pain the next moment. The most terrifying thing about him, though, is that his madness spreads like a disease. Other than that, perhaps I did not even get to see his true power. He tore our elders apart with just his blade, as if they were weak children. Nephis glanced at her own sword, then asked somberly, What about his rank and class? Anik lowered her head. It was hard to tell. He is of the corrupted rank, I think. As for his class, I am almost certain that he is a Titan, a corrupted Titan. Sonny's face grew dark. The memories of Falcon Scott flashed in his mind, bringing with them a bitter taste. It was another city that had been destroyed by a corrupted Titan, even if the scale and swiftness of destruction was different. He remained silent for a few moments, then asked quietly, Aren't Titans usually huge? Anik hesitated, then shrugged. Her azure eyes were crestfallen. Most are, but some aren't. More than that, the defiled, they were humans once. Their path to profane power is unique. He nodded, feeling a deep sense of unease. A corrupted titan. If one of these 6 plagues was indeed as powerful as the winter beast, then just how terrifying the dread lord would be. Still, Sonny felt a dark and scathing desire to kill that mad prince. It was strange, really. He had met all kinds of horrid nightmare creatures, but knowing that the mad butcher who destroyed Weave had been a human once filled him with dark wrath. Just how low can a person fall? Odious, the mad prince, whoever he had been before succumbing to corruption, was simply odious. Such a vile creature had no right to exist. Sonny gritted his teeth, thinking about how many of the abominations he had slain in the past were former humans as well. After thousands of years of corruption, the distinction was all but erased, but here in the nightmare, it felt different. Nephi's, meanwhile, had another question. Looking at the forlorn vista of Weave with a frown, she hesitated for a few moments. Then asked softly, "Anank, you said that the outsiders were the most powerful warriors of your city. The mad prince easily killed them all. Wouldn't that mean that he could have killed all the Riverborn as well? Why did he spare you?" Sonny grimaced. He was asking himself the same questions, but didn't want to speak it aloud in fear of hurting the young priestess more than she had already been hurt. Anank remained silent for a while, her head lowered. Eventually, she took a breath and said quietly, "Maybe he wanted us to suffer longer. Maybe he needed us to live some more for whatever reason. Maybe he simply did not care. The Riverborn, he did kill some. However, then, he stayed his sword and kneeled in front of the girl he spared. She was a child who had just recently arrived from the House of Youth. He asked her a question, then left." Sonny and Nephi's looked at each other somberly. She asked, "What did the defiled ask?" The young priestess lingered, then slowly shook her head. "He asked her, 'Do you wish to live?' She said that she did." Hearing that, the mad prince burst into laughter, wiped his bloody sword on her tunic, and disappeared. He never returned, and since all our elders were dead, we never heard about him again. Insane bastard. Sonny frowned, remembering the piece of flotsam that he had drifted on for the first couple of days in the nightmare. It was a tenuous connection at best, but why had the mad prince asked the girl what she wished? Was he, perhaps, the lunatic who had carved the frantic runes into the ancient wood? If so, then maybe the 6 plagues had already become 5. Considering that the piece of flotsam had seemed like a fragment of a destroyed vessel, the defiled titan might have perished in a battle with one of the harrowing nightmare creatures upstream. That said, there was a very troubling thing about connecting Sonny's improvised raft to one of the defiled from Verge. There were letters of the waking world alphabet among the runes. Too, how the hell would Mad Prince know them? Damnation! It was all too eerie and mysterious. Shaking his head, Sonny took one last glance at the drowned square. The fierce battle that had taken place here must have fractured the foundation of the artificial island, which was why it became flooded. He sighed and turned to Anank. "We still have to gather supplies, right?" She nodded. Sonny pulled the young woman away from the square and said in a soft voice, "Then show us around Weave. We can get them on the way." Anank smiled a little, while Nephi's threw him a grateful glance over her shoulder. "If Anank wants us to remember her city, then it's the least we can do. I'll make sure to write a detailed research paper after returning to NQSC so that everyone in the waking world could learn about it too." Sonny smiled. "You know, Anank, I am a well-respected professor in the future." She looked at him with a hint of confusion in her azure eyes. "A professor?" He nodded. "A teacher. I teach young awaken how to survive and provide for themselves in the wilderness, at the most famous academy in the world, no less. However, our knowledge of the intricacies of surviving in marine environments is not that extensive. I am sure I will gain a lot from learning about Weave. Then, I'll be able to teach my students about it as well. They'll be thanking me with tears in their eyes." The young priestess seemed more confused than touched. Sunny frowned. "What is it?" She shook her head slightly. "No, it's nothing. But my lord, aren't you a food merchant in the future? How can you also be a teacher?" The corner of Sunny's mouth twitched. He remained silent for a few moments, then answered stoically. "Learned people also have to eat, don't they? That's just how great I am. Respected academic, renowned warrior, accomplished military commander, thriving entrepreneur. I am the picture of a perfect gentleman." Anik looked at him, then nodded with bright sparks in her azure eyes. "My lord is amazing." As Sunny grinned, Nephi's added under her breath. "And so very modest." His grin dimmed, but only for a moment. Nodding energetically, Sunny agreed. "Indeed, amazing is a word that can be used to describe me." They traveled across Weave to collect everything needed for the long journey ahead. Even after long years of being abandoned, the city still seemed to be in a relatively good shape. However, beneath the beautiful surface, it had already started to crumble. Sunny knew that Weave was not going to exist for much longer. Maybe in a decade or two, the floating city was going to break apart and be swallowed by the currents of the great river, disappearing forever under the waves. Before it did, they gathered fruit from the wild groves and other supplies from various caches that Anik had established throughout the city. There was food, spices, wine, tea leaves, and necessities that one would need to travel the great river. There were items as well. The weapons and armor that the people of Weave had crafted and used were of inferior quality to the powerful memories that Sunny and Nephi's wielded, but they were able to collect a lot of things that would make traversing the tomb of Ariel easier, from simple blankets and cutlery to fishing nets sturdy enough to capture nightmare creatures and sail repair kits. Everything went into the covetous coffer. As they moved from one district to another, Anik also shared stories of Weave and its people with them. How they lived, what rituals they observed, what passions drove them, and what vices they sometimes succumbed to. There were interesting details about the everyday lives of the river people and entertaining anecdotes. Sunny really learned a lot from hearing these stories, and the more he learned, the more amazed he became. Their world was so different from anything he knew, and so they had adapted to its strange circumstances with the tenacious ingenuity inherent to all humans. Their knowledge of how to survive on the great river had been built over many generations of persistent, relentless learning and unceasing improvement. Humans were the most adaptable of species, indeed. When Anik started to tell them about Weave, there was a shadow of sadness in her eyes. However, as she remembered the people from her past, they gradually grew bright and warm. A sweet smile appeared on her lips. But the more the young priestess spoke, the more despondent Sunny became. He hid his expression and stared at the empty streets of the desolate city, his own eyes veiled by somber darkness. "It's unfair." Anik had been nothing but kind to them, so it was unfair. Sunny and Nephi's were going to leave Weave to travel into the distant past and challenge the nightmare, but she could never leave. Because she was riverborn. After guiding the two of them as far as she could, the young priestess was going to return to the crumbling city and live the rest of her life here, alone and forsaken. Sunny's heart was heavy, and his hatred of the mad prince burned darker. Looking away, he gritted his teeth. Curse that vile bastard. Consumed by despondence, Sunny tried to find solace in anger, but it was of no use. Then Sunny tried to remind himself that the Anik he knew was just an apparition conjured by the spell, the real Anik. The true priestess of the nightmare spell who had lived in the real tomb of Ariel was long dead, her spirit and bones taken by the great river. She had never met Sunny and Nephi's. She had never traveled to the far reaches of the future, or made delicious small pies for two complete strangers. In fact, it was not at all clear if the real Anik shared the same fate as the one he knew. The Serpent King had brought many challengers into the nightmare. After all, their actions had to have changed the flow of events within this version of the tomb of Ariel. Perhaps the real Weave was never destroyed by one of the 6 plagues, or had been wiped out entirely long before Anik was born. But telling himself that Anik was not real did not help either. It never did. Be it the first nightmare, the second, or the third, Sonny could not help but treat the people he met as real. With a heavy sigh, he turned to look at the magnificent structure they were approaching. It was an unusual one. Much larger than most buildings in Weave, it was situated in the very heart of the city, on a solitary island ship that floated some distance away from the rest. The artificial island was connected to the neighboring ones with rope bridges of white silk, resembling a spider sitting at the center of a vast web. The structure itself was tall and imposing, built of roughly cut black stone. Tattered white banners were hanging from its walls, fluttering in the wind. It looked nebulous and sinister, like a temple of some dark deity. Sonny had an idea who that deity was. Looking up, he saw a lonely figure standing on the roof of the numinous temple, looking down at the desolate ruin of Weave. The black silk of its long hair and tunic remained motionless despite the strong wind. He couldn't see the figure's face from the distance, but silhouetted against the azure sky, it seemed strangely grim. There you are. The sin of Solace had finally shown himself after hiding somewhere for a long time. And yet, the Wraith was simply observing the ghost city from above instead of tormenting Sonny with snide remarks. Its behavior had been getting stranger and stranger ever since the start of the nightmare. Well, good. Stay away for as long as you want, you won't be missed. Paying attention to the apparition through one of the shadows, Sonny followed Anik across one of the rope bridges. As they got closer to the ominous temple, Sonny and Nephi's felt a strong sense of unease. However, the young priestess looked unperturbed. If anything, her expression grew calmer. This is the last place we will visit in Weave. Even her voice sounded lighter. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then asked in a somewhat stifled tone, "Is this the Temple of Weaver?" Anik shook her head with a faint smile. "No, my lord. Weaver was elusive and had no desire to be worshipped. It is useless to worship the demon of fate, anyway. No matter how virtuous you are and how many offerings you make, fate will always remain uncaring, unchanged, and inevitable." She pointed to this dark temple. "No, this is the temple of the nightmare spell, of the gift Weaver has given us to rely on instead of the gods, the demons, and of fate itself." Of fate itself. Sonny was once again faced with the fact the demon of fate seemed to have created the spell to resist the very thing that was supposed to be the source of their power. Maybe Weaver was bound by the chains of fate, just like I am bound by them too. The sudden thought was both ominous and chilling. If even the demon of fate had not been able to escape its clutches, then how could Sonny ever hope to succeed where Weaver had failed? Still, despite everything that had happened, he still wanted to be free. That primal desire was rooted deep within his soul, smoldering, too vast and searing to be put out by shallow things like knowledge or wisdom. Even though Sonny had learned that there was no such thing as true freedom, at least not without sacrificing everything one held dear, he still stubbornly clung to the desperate wish of breaking free of his bonds. It was just that the tumultuous twists and turns of his strange life had dampened that fiery hope a little. He sighed, then glanced at Nephi's with a guarded expression. She was not going to do something extreme like burning the temple of the spell down, was she? Anik might have been sincerely devoted to them, but Sonny doubted that the young priestess would just watch silently as her home was destroyed. And although it was sometimes easy to forget because of her gentle temperament, she was still a true saint. Even if she wasn't, Sonny simply did not want to fight Anik. Luckily, Nephi seemed to be holding back her hatred for the sake of their kind guide. She had been raised by her grandmother, after all. Even though Neph had not shown it, meeting Anik must have pulled at the strings of her heart, which still existed, no matter how abused, neglected, and ravaged by torment it was. Let's hurry inside. Oblivious to the hidden conflict between her faith and the people she considered to be its apostles, the young priestess headed toward the gates of the sinister temple with a smile on her lips. Sunny and Nephi followed, neither of them saying anything. Soon they passed through the dark entrance and found themselves within a vast hall. Its interior was shrouded in darkness, creating a solemn and mysterious atmosphere, for everyone except Sunny, of course, who could see everything just fine. Narrow beams of stark sunlight were falling from the elaborately carved light wells in the ceiling, intertwined in a complicated pattern. The Temple of the Nightmare spell looked frightening and sinister on the outside, but its interior was quietly beautiful. The intricate tapestry of falling light resembled the breathtaking weave of the inner workings of the spell, while the darkness of the vast hall was like the lightless void between dream and reality where it was hiding. It was strangely peaceful here. What caught Sunny's eye, however, were the white tapestries of enormous spiderwebs growing freely between the columns and support beams of the hall. He shifted uncomfortably and pointed to them, mentally preparing for battle. I think an abomination did make a nest in the ruins. Anik looked at him in confusion for a moment, then chuckled. Her melodious laughter echoed under the roof of the dark hall. No need to be alarmed, my lord. The spider silk has always been here. No one knows what the demon of fate looks like, you see, which is why they are often depicted as a spider. Because of that, spiders were akin to sacred animals to us followers of Weaver. It was forbidden to harm a spider or its web, and we lived peacefully side by side with many. She swept her gaze across the interior of the temple, her eyes growing wistful. I spent my youth in this temple, learning the duties of a priestess from my mother. The spiders who lived here were my friends. They are all gone now, of course. Fate wasn't merciful to them either, but their silk remains. Sunny gave the young woman a strange look. So little Anik was friends with spiders. She must have been one hell of a creepy girl. But then again, who was he to judge? Sunny had never been a well-adjusted child himself. At least I didn't have to deal with all this sticky web. Gods, living in this temple must have been annoying. As he thought that, his gaze finally settled on a mass of roughly cut stone towering in the center of the hall. It resembled a wide pillar that had been broken by a devastating blow and then damaged by unbearable heat, its upper part deformed like a melted candle. The widest beam of sunlight fell vertically on the stone pillar, bathing it in blinding white radiance. Walking closer, Sunny noticed that the whole mass of stone was covered by engravings. There had been many scenes depicted on it once, it seemed, but now only one remained. He shivered. Cut into the ancient stone, an enormous gate was depicted, its titanic surface wrapped in unbreakable chains. In front of it, a tall figure stood, the shape and form of its body hidden by a dark mantle. Only the face could be seen, or rather, the mask. The mask of a fearsome demon with ferocious fangs and a crown of 3 twisting horns. Drawn to the stone image, Sunny felt his blood stir. Of course, he knew whose figure was carved into the broken pillar. It was Weaver. Sunny remained silent for a while, looking at the broken pillar. Eventually, he turned to Anik and asked in a hesitant tone, "What is this?" The young priestess approached the mass of dark stone and bowed her head. After a few moments of reverent silence, she straightened and looked at him with a proud smile. "It is one of the greatest relics of Weave, my lord. This column was brought into the tomb of Ariel by my elders, and then carried all the way here after their exile. It depicts the deeds of Weaver, from birth to the bestowal of the nightmare spell to my people." Her smile dimmed. "However, as you can see, The column has been severely damaged over the ages. Now only this one image remains." Sonny frowned and stared at chains wrapped around the Titanic gate. For whatever reason, just looking at them made him feel deeply uncomfortable. "But what is its meaning?" His voice was full of both curiosity and apprehension. Anank stepped closer to the broken pillar and studied the ancient engraving for a few moments in solemn silence. Then, she said in a melodious tone, "This is a fragment of the mural that tells the story of one of Weaver's greatest deeds, the story of how the wandering demon braved the eternal abyss." The frown on Sonny's face deepened. He briefly glanced at Nephi's and said, "The eternal abyss, do you mean the primordial void?" The young priestess nodded. "Yes, after the gods sealed the void, Weaver was the only one who managed to enter it, or rather, the only one of those who had entered it who managed to return alive. At least that is what the legends say." Sonny raised an eyebrow. He knew that the gods had sealed the eternal void, from which they were born. He also knew that the unknown were, most likely, the creatures of that void, while the unknown was a specific being that had somehow given life to the 7 demons, and that the reflection of either the former or the latter was forever frozen in the depths of Weaver's eyes. Was that how the demon of fate had ended up carrying the reflection of the unknown within their pupils, by entering the void and witnessing its horror? If so, Sonny wasn't sure if the depiction on the pillar had anything to do with how that event had happened. He doubted that there was an actual gate, no matter how impressive, that barred the way into the eternal void. What kind of gate could seal something that was much greater and more ancient than even the gods? He also was uncertain that Weaver had actually physically entered the void. Of course, it was possible, but there was another probability as well. The strings of fate stretched from the past into the future. The demon of fate had obviously been much more capable of looking at them than Sonny was. What if Weaver had simply traced the great tapestry of fate all the way back to its origin, to the point when the world had not existed yet, and all there was a vast and ever-changing void? If so, then using the "where is my eye" enchantment was much more perilous than Sonny had thought, and he already considered it deadly. In fact, now that he knew that simply knowing certain things could corrupt living beings, he saw the ability to perceive the strings of fate in a new light. Dangerous. Of course, there was still the possibility that Weaver had indeed ventured into the eternal void physically. Maybe that was how they had ended up having to sever their arm in the Ebony Tower, although the timing did not really make sense for that to happen. He remained silent for a bit, then asked in a dry tone, "And why exactly did Weaver do such a thing?" Anank smiled. "Weaver believed that knowledge was the origin of power." "Yeah, I heard as much." "And that was the reason they had ventured into the eternal abyss, to find the answer to the greatest of secrets." Nephi's was looking at the ancient mural. Hearing these words, she frowned slightly and asked, "What secret?" The young priestess laughed. "How would mortals like us know? Some legends say that the demon of fate wanted to gain knowledge of the origin of the gods. Others say that it was Weaver's own origin that they sought to uncover. Perhaps it was both." Sonny stared at her for a moment. "Perhaps the two are one and the same." Anank shook her head. "Whatever it was that Weaver had learned in the abyss is not that important, really. What matters more is that witnessing the eternal void gave the demon of fate the first reason to create the nightmare spell. That is what we, its priests, believe. So while this mural does not depict the inception of the nightmare spell, it does depict the inception of the idea of it. Which is why the remains of this column is the greatest relic of Weave." Sonny tilted his head. What does the eternal void have to do with the nightmare spell? That's the first time I'm hearing about this." Wasn't Anank contradicting herself? Before, She had said that the purpose of the nightmare spell was to give living beings a chance to save themselves from the annihilation of the Doom War. But then again, she was a priestess, and religious beliefs were rarely bound by reason. Contradictions were par for the course, and for the same reason, Sunny had to take everything Anank said with a grain of salt. Still, there could be some truth to what she said. The young priestess bowed to the broken pillar again, then walked away with light steps. "My lord, my lady, come. I will show you the rest of the temple." Sunny and Nephi's exchanged a glance, both pondering the meaning of the ancient mural. Neither of them knew what to make of it, so they followed Anank in silence. Soon, the three of them settled for sleep. Tired after the long journey and the forlorn eeriness of Weave, Sunny fell into the embrace of dreams almost instantly. That night, he saw a nightmare. In the nightmare, Sunny was a spider with one of his 8 legs broken off. He was crawling across the stone floor, consumed by fear. Behind him, broken chains were falling down with a deafening clangor, and a titanic door stood wide open, its dark maw hiding indescribable horror. Sunny crawled and crawled, but no matter how he strained himself, the horrifying gate only drew closer. Sunny dreamt of a titanic gate that stood wide open, something boundless and entirely alien hiding in the darkness of its colossal maw. He was a spider with a severed leg, crawling away as broken chains fell to the ground all around him. His mind was consumed by terror, while his heart was full of a cold, bitter feeling of betrayal and regret. "Escape, I must escape." Sunny pushed his small body across the stone floor. There were beautiful webs veiling the vast hall of the temple, their silk threads weaved into a grandiose tapestry. A spark flew, and a moment later, the webs were engulfed in fire. They disappeared in a flash, leaving behind only clouds of acrid smoke that obscured the entire world. At least he couldn't see the harrowing gate anymore. Suffocating, he crawled through the smoke, and slowly, torturously, the terror devouring his soul dissipated. Sunny felt as if he had escaped the immediate danger. However, he was hopelessly lost. There was nothing except for searing heat and the dark glow of spreading flame around him. His body was already starting to grow unbearably hot. He froze for a moment, resting and trying to find the way out of the smoldering inferno. Then, for a moment, he felt a breeze caressing his singed carapace from somewhere ahead. There! Sunny rose to his 7 feet and limped forward as fast as he could. Soon he left the smoke and the fire behind. There was a silent expanse of still water around him now. The smoke was gone, but a thick mist took its place. It swirled and moved, flowing slowly past the shivering figure of the small spider. "Where am I?" Sunny took a step and discovered that he could somehow walk on the surface of the water, just like he could within the Soul Sea. Advancing hesitantly, he ventured deeper into the fog. Some time passed, perhaps only a few minutes, perhaps an eternity, and he had lost all sense of direction. There was nothing but mist in the world, until something else appeared in the gray void. Sunny trembled. There ahead of him something was sitting on the calm surface of the water, staring down. The figure was dressed in tattered rags, its gaunt body hidden from view. It seemed like a human, or was at least human-shaped. The man's dirty hair was hanging like seaweeds, and his face was hidden from view. A jagged band of dark metal rested on his head like a tarnished crown. Suddenly, Sunny felt cold. Though the Mad Prince. It was one of the 6 heralds of the estuary, one of the 6 plagues. The creature in front of him looked rather pitiful, but it was still a corrupted titan. He was in dire danger. Luckily, the defiled abomination did not seem to notice the small spider. Mad Prince was sitting motionlessly, staring at his own reflection with an absent expression. It was as though he existed in an entirely different reality. A moment later, Sunny suddenly felt profound relief. A simple realization dispelled his fear and unease. I'm sleeping, it's a dream. Of course it was. Sonny was not a spider. He was currently in the temple of the nightmare spell, near Nephi's and Ankh, not in the middle of a boundless sea, lost in the mist. The corrupted titan in front of him was not real, and the danger the creature represented was not real either. Thank the gods. As Sonny thought that, he was not a spider anymore. However, he was also not himself. Instead, Sonny was tall and nebulous. He had 8 nimble arms, one of them crafted out of pristine white porcelain. His slender figure was veiled by a dark mantle, and a mask of black polished wood hid his features. Looking down from his towering height, Sonny studied the pitiful creature in front of him. The mad prince did not look that frightening, especially for a titan. However, for some unknown reason, the hunched figure filled Sonny with dread. It was just too familiar. As if sensing a gaze, the tattered man suddenly shifted and slowly raised his head. A dreadful face that seemed like a ghastly mask of countless scars, and 2 dark eyes burning with unfathomable madness revealed themselves, making Sonny take an involuntary step back. Then a whisper that was like broken glass resounded, scratching at his ears. The mad prince whispered, "Who dares dream about me?" And just like that, the relief Sonny felt was destroyed. What? He knows that this is a dream. No, that is not possible. How? The eyes of the defiled slowly gained refocus, becoming sharp and crushing. Pressed down by the unbearable weight of harrowing insanity hidden in their dark depths, Sonny took another step back and held his breath. It's a dream, it's a dream. The creature's lips, meanwhile, twisted in a wicked smile. Ah, it's you. Which one are you? The mad prince suddenly froze, then groaned and struck his head with a fist. I can't remember. Ah, but it is also an answer. His ugly face rippled, as if trying to assume a human expression. You're neither. You are an imposter. The creature's voice suddenly grew dark and vicious. You murderer. An unhinged laugh escaped his lips, and then the mad prince slowly rose. His tattered rags moved, shrouded in mist. As Sonny took another step back, desperately trying to wake up, the defiled took a step forward. How about it, murderer? Come closer, I'll tell you a secret. You deserve that much. There was suddenly nowhere to go. The gray mist became solid, blocking all paths to retreat. And Sonny was indeed curious against his will. He was a great lover of secrets, after all. As he shuddered, feeling his thoughts spin out of control, there was suddenly a presence between him and the mad prince. Someone else was standing there, blocking the view of the mad creature with his back. It was a young man in a black tunic, with long raven-black hair and a grim expression on his pale face. The Sin of Solace. What is he doing here? The wraith seemed uncharacteristically serious as he stared the mad prince down. Without turning his head, the apparition said in a voice that was neither snide nor mocking. Instead, it was grave. What are you doing, fool? Summon your horse and get out of here. Hurry. Shielded by the Sin of Solace, Sonny was suddenly capable of pushing through the mist again. He backed away as the defiled smiled wider. Where are you going, murderer? Don't you want to learn a secret? You won't regret knowing it. Ah, maybe you will. Sonny did not know what was happening, but he was sure of one thing. Whatever it was that the mad prince wanted to tell him was not something he should ever learn. Unless he wanted to become as mad and broken as the defiled abomination was. It was already crazy enough to be fighting for his life, or rather, for his humanity, within a dream, which he was dreaming inside the third nightmare. Staggering away, Sonny called upon his shadows. Instantly, 3 figures rose from below. Taciturn saint, scrawny imp, and a tenebrous steed shrouded in darkness. The mad prince exploded with laughter. Good. Oh, this makes me feel nostalgic. We will. Saint was the first one to fall. Before she could even move, a sword suddenly flashed, followed by a turbulent whirlwind of surging mist. The graceful stone knight froze, a thin crack suddenly appearing on her onyx armor. Then, as silently as she had been born, Saint crumbled into 1,000 shards of black stone. A cloud of ruby dust exploded into the air, painting the still water crimson. Saint! Sonny's eyes widened, but before he could do anything, the sin of Solace pushed him away. "Run, you bastard, she's not real." The imp was second. The little fiend hesitated, visibly scared by the tattered figure of the mad titan. However, then, it bravely jumped forward, reaching for the flesh of the defiled with his claws. The invisible sword whistled again, and the scrawny figure suddenly staggered. With liquid flames flowing out of Imp's mouth, he looked at Sonny with a frightened expression. Then his eyes grew dim, and his little head slid off his neck, falling into the water with a quiet splash. "Ah!" Sonny felt as if his own mind was on the verge of breaking. Pressing down the tempest of pain and guilt raging in his heart, he gritted his teeth and turned away. His hand grasped Nightmare's mane, and with a stifled scream, he jumped onto the stallion's back. The dark courser was already galloping away, away through the swirling mist. The mad prince's laugh reached them from behind. "Where are you going, murderer? I am not done with you." Sonny did not turn to look back. Gripping the sides of Nightmare with his thighs, he raised both hands and pressed them to his ears. "Don't listen, don't listen." However, he still heard it. The voice of the sin of Solace, who said with a hint of resignation in his hateful, familiar voice, Sonny's own voice. "Damn lunatic, are you trying to steal my job?" He had never been so happy to have a wraith born from the whisper of the demon of dread stuck in his head before. Nightmare flew through the mist, and soon the veil of it obscured the mad prince and the sin of Solace, muffling their voices until nothing except silence remained. Sonny had also turned into himself, finally. He had a human body once again, as well as 2 human hands. The dark mantle was replaced by the soft silk of the Shroud of Dusk. Looking down, he patted the black steed on the shoulder and let out a shaky breath. I think we are safe now." Then he hesitated for a moment and added in a small voice, "But do you think that I can wake up now?" Nightmare huffed and struck the surface of the still water with his hooves, soaring high into the air. As they rose higher and higher, the mist grew thinner and thinner, until eventually a ray of sunshine broke through its blinding veil. And as soon as it did, Sonny woke up with a start. "Arg!" He sat up, covered in cold sweat. With his heart beating wildly, Sonny grabbed at his chest and froze, looking around the dark room of the desolate temple. Slowly, his panic started to dissolve. A dream, it was just a dream. Sonny slowly exhaled, then shuddered and shook his head. No, it might have been a dream, but it definitely had not been just a dream. He did not know what kind of power could have allowed the mad prince, who was most likely either dead already or far, far away, to appear in his nightmare. However, he was certain that the creature he had met in the dream was not a simple figment of his imagination. Sonny did not know whether the tattered abomination he had faced was the defiled Titan himself or some echo left behind by his passing. But he knew that hearing the secret the abomination wanted to share would have been the end of him. Gods damn it, even the dreams aren't safe here. As his heart calmed down a little, he sat in silence for a while, trying to gather his thoughts. There were a lot of strange things about that dreadful dream, however. Before he could consider them carefully, a sudden worry clouded his mind. Sonny hurriedly sent his shadows to check on Nephi's and Anak. Making sure that both were sleeping peacefully in the neighboring rooms, he then shuddered at the memory of his shadows being destroyed and proceeded to summon them one after another. He called upon the dark courser first. As the sin of Solace said, Saint and Imp should not have been real. The black steed could be summoned into his dream because that was the nature of Nightmare's powers, but the other two were different. So only Nightmare had actually faced the Mad Prince most likely. The black stallion appeared in the shadows, keeping to his intangible form. He seemed agitated but otherwise unharmed. Relieved, Sonny let out a long sigh. "Thank you, buddy. You really saved my hide there." Dismissing Nightmare, he summoned Saint next. The graceful knight appeared out of the darkness, as stoic and indifferent as ever. She was unharmed. Feeling as if a great burden had been lifted off his heart, Sonny closed his eyes for a moment. "You're safe, thank the gods." Saint gave him a strange look but remained silent. "Well, of course she did." "Go back now, no, actually stay here. Keep watch throughout the night, all right." The graceful knight stared at him for a few moments, then turned away and silently left the room to stand guard in the corridor. Sonny took a deep breath and rubbed his face. Now only Imp remained. He summoned the scrawny goblin, then scratched the back of his head. "Ah, right, that little rascal is still stuck digesting the armor of the black turtle. Damn it, when will he stop lazing around and—" But before Sonny could finish the thought, a frightening figure suddenly rose from the shadows, towering above him like a demon forged out of dark steel and sharp blades. "Arg, what the—" Unbeknownst to Sonny, the little rascal had already awakened from his slumber. Only he wasn't so little anymore. Sonny had grown accustomed to calling his youngest shadow an imp, however. Now the ravenous fiend was finally worthy of his fearsome name. The creature in front of Sonny could not be called little, nor could it be called scrawny. It was almost as tall as Saint, towering above him like a demonic warrior whose body had been forged out of dark steel in the infernal flames of hell. There were a lot of similarities with how Imp had looked during their last battle in Falcon Scott, but there were also differences. The original ravenous fiend had been tall, but gaunt. His body had been covered in thick plates of black bone armor, and he was as ferocious as he was stealthy, like a vengeful wraith born out of hungry darkness. The new and improved Imp, however, was not gaunt. Instead, he seemed like a knight clad in a suit of plate armor. That armor was not made out of bone, either. It was made out of a strange, dark metal. The ravenous shadow had seemed like he was forged out of black steel before, but the look of his metallic body was changed now. It acquired a dark sheen and a glossy quality, as though the transcendent devil had been cast out of black silver or covered in a layer of dull chrome. There were changes in the design of his armor, too. It was as though Fiend had been forged out of countless broken swords. There were curved blades growing from his elbows and knees, as well as ferocious spikes rising here and there from his dark armor. His face was hidden behind the visor of a fearsome helmet, with twisting horns rising from it and a jagged line breaking its surface, where the fiend's terrible mouth was hidden, brimming with dagger-like teeth. His claws were like short swords, and in his ferocious eyes, infernal flames burned with intense heat. See crap. And that demonic monstrosity was currently staring at Sonny with an extremely nasty expression in its glowing orange-red eyes. Sonny awkwardly cleared his throat. "Ah, hey there, buddy." Imp's mouth split in a sinister grin, releasing more heat and infernal glow. Sonny forced out a smile. "Wow, you look great. I guess all that delicious magical steel I found and fed you out of nothing but pure kindness, maybe, really did you some good, huh?" He coughed. "Say, you wouldn't be remembering all the times I kicked and berated you, would you? Or, thinking about strange things like revenge, would you?" Imp took a step forward, the glow of his demonic eyes an incinerating maw falling on Sonny's face. His grin widened, the sharp steel teeth glinting in the darkness. His voice sounded like a roaring flame. "Like revenge." With that, Imp raised his hand. In that moment, Sonny's expression changed, and he added evenly, "Because if you do, Your master will have a good reason to find out just how sturdy this new body of yours is." Imp's grin froze for a moment, and his hand did too. He hesitated for a moment, and then carefully fixed a crease on Sonny's tunic. The steel fiend growled politely, "Master, good." Then he backed away, stared at Sonny for a bit, and hurriedly left the room. Sonny let out a relieved sigh, then smiled. "Ah, they grow up so fast." One of his shadows followed Imp into the corridor to see what the big guy was up to. Moving too silently for a creature of his size and weight, the steel devil approached Saint and stopped next to her, as if to join her in guarding the rooms. There they stood, Saint and Fiend. Imp was acting as nonchalantly as the taciturn knight was, but Sonny did not miss the fact that the bastard was puffing out his chest and secretly throwing glances at Saint, as if waiting for her reaction. After a while, the stone knight finally turned her head and stared at the steel fiend indifferently. Imp seemed to have secretly held his breath. Saint remained motionless for a while, then raised her hand and casually flicked the fiend's chest with a finger. After hearing a melodious ring, she tilted her head a little. Finally, the graceful knight nodded curtly and turned away. Imp looked beyond himself. Maintaining a stoic facade worthy of his ferocious appearance, he also looked away and returned to silently guarding the corridor. However, the flames in his eyes were dancing jubilantly. Sonny scoffed. "This ugly idiot, he's seriously cute." He shook his head, then summoned the runes to learn exactly what had changed about Ravenous Fiend, except for appearance. The runes read: Shadow Ravenous Fiend. Shadow Rank Transcendent. Shadow Class Devil. Shadow Description: a pitiful little creature traveled through a nightmarish land. Shadow Attributes: Lucky Marvel, Ravenous Shadow Sworn, Complete Steel Body. The Greater Steel Body had become Complete Steel Body. Its description read: Attribute Description: This shadow's body is forged out of sublime blessed steel and is without a flaw. It seemed that consuming the silver armor of the black turtle had not only improved the quality of the alloy from which Imp's body was made, but also removed all the remaining imperfections from it. Granted, Sonny was inclined to take its supposed flawlessness with a grain of salt. After all, he had recently learned that flaws were one of the universal laws of the world. Still, if the spell deemed it necessary to call Imp's newly evolved body flawless, he had to be very close to having no physical vulnerabilities. It seemed that Sonny finally had another powerful shadow to face the most dire enemies side by side with. Imp was now perfectly capable of participating in battles alongside Saint and Nightmare, reaching the fearsome level of power that a transcendent devil was supposed to possess. With his indestructible steel body, which was a weapon in and of itself, as well as his dual affinity for shadows and flame, the ferocious fiend would be a terror on the battlefield. Good, just in time. Sonny's face grew somber. Things had been calm for a while, ever since Anik had found them. But he knew that there were plenty of harrowing battles waiting for them in the depths of the tomb of Ariel. Imp, or was Sonny supposed to call him Fiend now, did not get new abilities, which was logical really, since the black turtle was only a monster, and the gluttonous shadow had not even consumed the flesh of the abominations, only its armor. Still, the scrawny goblin had become a fearsome ogre. He was going to significantly increase Sonny's battle power, not the least because of his carefully chosen diet. Sonny had given up on feeding Ravenous Fiend a lot of valuable stuff so that his growth did not become muddled. Imp's main affinities had to be established first: steel and shadows. The flames he had absorbed from the colossal body of the Sun Prince were a pleasant side effect, increasing the power of the Steel Devil's attacks, but what Sonny had really wanted was to make his youngest shadow as indestructible as possible. Saint possessed an incredible level of defense, which was only made greater by her masterful battle prowess. But Imp was different. If not guided cautiously, he could have ended up being vulnerable. Considering the types of situations Sunny often found himself in, that vulnerability was bound to result in him losing his first shadow sooner rather than later. Survivability was king. He had regrettably proven it himself over and over again, clinging to life by the skin of his teeth on many occasions. Which was why Sunny was so impressed by how hard to kill the original scavenger had been. He had experienced the toughness of the spiteful fiend's bone armor personally, after all, and wanted to make Imp at least as durable. If the ravenous shadow managed to approach the level of defense Saint possessed, that would have been even better. In that regard, Sunny seemed to have overshot his initial goal by a lot. Imp's complete steel body was not only as durable as Saint's graceful body was, but vastly more so. His metal carapace was sturdier than her stone-like armor, and much more importantly, that durability encompassed the entire body of the ravenous devil, not just its surface. Although Saint was hard to wound, she was actually quite vulnerable once her armor and resilient skin were breached. The internals of her miraculous stone body were well protected, but fragile. The ruby dust that flowed out of the wounds like blood was proof of that. Ravenous Fiend, however, was now fully tempered, both outside and inside. There were no vulnerabilities that an enemy could exploit, at least not an enemy using physical attacks. Which meant that while Imp could deliver fearsome blows, his true power lay in being nearly impervious to physical harm. He could become the shield of the shadow cohort. Or a punching bag. Sunny scratched the back of his head and looked in the direction where Imp was standing, hidden from view by a wall, with a guilty expression. The poor guy had not realized what the future held for him, had he? "Sorry, buddy." He shook his head and remained silent for a while, thinking. There were two fully matured transcendent devils serving him now. Sunny himself had become unbelievably strong due to Shadow Dance, at least for an ascended. If augmented by Nephi's, his power was probably comparable to some saints now, enough to give him a fighting chance if nothing else. If Sunny was assisted by his shadows, most saints would probably be the ones at risk, not him. And that was without Soul Serpent, who should have become the strongest of the shadows by now. But still, that power was not enough. After experiencing the dire perils of the upper reaches of the great river, and knowing that he would have to venture far downstream, into the distant past, Sunny knew that even his current ridiculous level of strength was not enough to slay the kind of adversaries he would be facing. The problem was, I am almost at my limit. There were very few things he could realistically achieve in a short amount of time to increase his power even further. The only feasible one was helping Nightmare evolve into an ascended terror and unlock his Dream Curse ability. That was going to happen relatively soon, but after that, Sunny would reach a dead end. With a lot of effort, he could potentially become a terror, but even that boost was not going to be significant enough to change the odds in his favor. More memories, and stronger ones at that, were not going to cut it either. Sunny had grown a lot, more than any master in history had, perhaps, but now, his head was pressed against an indestructible ceiling. The only way for him to leap to a new height was by breaking that ceiling and becoming a saint. Which could only happen after the nightmare, meaning too late. Of course, he had recently learned from Anik that people could transcend without the assistance of the spell. That path was open to him, but sadly, Sunny did not have 100 spare years or more to slowly learn how to do just that. What was left then? He frowned. Actually, I am thinking about it all wrong. Sunny had been a loner for most of his life, and even after learning how to rely on others and trust his friends, he still put a lot of meaning into personal strength, which was not exactly unwise, but, at the same time, served as an artificial limit. Although he had not lived through Nef's second nightmare, The lesson she had learned there resonated with his own experiences. Personal strength was important, but it paled in comparison to true power. Take Antarctica, for example. Sonny had achieved incredible things there, but he had not achieved them alone. The evacuation of hundreds of millions of civilians was only possible because the government had mobilized vast resources to send the first and second evacuation armies into the southern quadrant. Without the irregulars, without the mundane soldiers and thousands of awakened who had fought and died to save the people of Antarctica, Sonny would not have achieved anything. His personal strength was nothing when compared to the united determination of all those brave people. It was the same here in the third nightmare. Sonny had to destroy a dire enemy, the forces of defilement populating the corrupted city of Verge and the 6 plagues that ruled it. Dread Lord, Torment, Undying Slaughter, Soul Stealer, Devouring Beast, and Mad Prince. So why was he only thinking about his personal strength? Wasn't the power of his allies also his power? Nephi's Cassie, Effie, Kai, Jet, and even Mordred. They were as much a part of his power as Saint, Imp, and Nightmare. Since Sonny had reached the ceiling of what he himself could achieve as a master, wouldn't it be wiser for him to put his efforts into empowering his allies? This is it. Shrouded in darkness, Sonny slowly nodded. That was the path he had to take if he wanted to survive the nightmare. After reaching fallen grace, he and Nephi's had to find the rest of the cohort. And once they found them, Sonny had to make sure that his friends, and Mordred too, grew as powerful as possible. He had to make them into a force capable of defeating the 6 plagues. For their sake and also his own. Sonny sighed and closed his eyes for a moment. The future was daunting. But when had it not been so? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.